Alright, this is the TechCG speed test. We've got 4 phones this time, the Xiaomi Mi 9 and the K20 Pro. This is a cheaper version than this with cheaper camera components. We got the brand new Nova 5 Pro and the Huawei P30 Pro. This is a cheaper version than this with cheaper camera components. We'll start with the boot up test. Not extremely relevant on a daily basis, but it gives me a chance to introduce the phones. We've got the 2 Huawei phones on the right hand side using the Kirin 980 and 8GB of RAM. The 2 Xiaomi phones are on the left. They've got 6GB of RAM and a Snapdragon 855 in both of those. Will the 2 extra gigabytes of RAM in the Huawei phones affect the performance throughout the test? Let's find out. Whilst the phones are still cold, we'll just run an Antutu benchmark on all of them. You can see that the Nova 5 Pro hasn't been tested yet. It's a brand new phone. Both of the Huawei phones are not set on performance mode. That's how they come out of the box, and I assume most people will use them like that. The Snapdragon is a more powerful chip than the Kirin 980. If you put the Huawei phones on performance mode, you could add around about 7,000 onto the score that they get. A good score, but it will never reach the Snapdragons. Next, I'm going to take a 5-minute 4K video and export it using KineMaster, or Qiaoying is the Chinese name. Unfortunately, I ran into a problem with the Nova 5 Pro. For some reason, the app just would not work. I uninstalled it, installed it again, and tried lots of different things, but I had no luck there. I'm gonna have to give it a did not finish on this test. Again, the Snapdragon phones were quicker at exporting that 4K video. But remember, the P30 Pro is not in performance mode. You can probably take a minute or 2 off the time if you did put it in performance mode. Next, we've got 2 rounds of app opening. On the apps you can see on the screen there, starting with small daily apps like WeChat or Weibo. That's WhatsApp and Facebook if you don't live in China. Then towards the end, it is very game heavy with very long opening screens on those games. Because this test is open to human error, e.g. me just being clumsy or slow, I chose a lot of games that have very long opening screens. That will mitigate any time differences between me opening apps on different phones. You can see all the phones here are really breezing through opening apps on this first round. There are 2 rounds here, and that's because we're testing RAM as well. If any of the phones need to reload apps, it will take a long time, and we'll see some time differences here. To make this fairer and a bit more scientific, I repeated the test 3 times on each phone. That will give us more data and average out the times a little bit more, just in case one phone had problems on one of the round, just in case there was an advert on an app screen that there wasn't on another phone. So here are the times across 3 runs. Next up is Geekbench. I want to see how the phones are dealing with the heat here, because they're all running pretty hot by now. And they get very similar scores across the board. And a new test for the channel is Passmark. Considering that UFS 3.1 is coming into more and more phones, I want to see how that will affect things going forward. None of these phones use UFS 3.1. They're all using UFS 2.0. Unfortunately, this was the second time where the Nova 5 Pro had an issue. I just could not finish the test. It kept crashing. This is my favorite test, and it probably is yours too. So we're opening a set of apps in a row. We've got some very light apps like Baidu and Taobao, shopping apps and search apps. Then we're going into more heavy games. I'm going to load each of the apps simultaneously. You can see just how quick each of the phones loads each of the apps, or if there are any big differences in the way that things are loaded, and also loading times between them. Then, after I've opened all the apps, I'm going to flick back through each of the apps and see if any need to be reloaded. This is a really great test of RAM management and just daily app usage. Remember that the Xiaomi phones have 2 GB less RAM, so we'll see if that makes a difference. If you're opening 3 or 4 or 5 apps on a daily basis, is it going to slow you down? So we're loading the last app here, this game, and then we are going to go back through the apps and see if any need to be reloaded. Considering we've got 4 or 5 very resource heavy games, I would expect maybe one of them to be shut down, but you can see the app before the last one, this is PUBG, was in memory in all of the phones. Going back a little bit further, this first person shooter game, it's really popular in China, and you can see it's still in memory on all of the phones. Then going back to Subway Surfers, this game is usually taken out of memory if memory is becoming thin, but you can see it's still in memory on all of the phones. Going back now to the web-based apps, first we've got Baidu, and it's still in memory on all of the phones. No difference in performance here between any of these. And then the last one, Taobao, the first one that we opened, you can see all of the phones kept all of the apps in memory. So on this occasion, 8 versus 6 gigabytes of RAM made no difference. You're going to get a very similar experience from all of these phones, to be honest. I don't know why the Nova 5 had an issue with a couple of apps. They're going to have to update that software, but I'm sure that will come. Most telling actually was the RAM management test, where even though the Mi 9 and the K20 Pro only have 6 gigabytes of RAM compared to the 8 gigabytes in the Huawei devices, all of the apps were still open in all of the phones. So the choice is yours. The Redmi K20 Pro is the cheapest of all these phones. And then we have the Huawei and the Mi 9, the retail price being exactly the same. And then going on to the P30 Pro because of that camera being the most expensive. But they're all powerful phones and probably enough for everybody's daily needs. Why you be all on my line about nothing? Why won't you go get you $1 or something?